Today is Wednesday, January 23rd, 2013, and we're continuing our interview with Dr. Donald J. Banks. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
And we're going to pick up, we're kind of at the point where we're talking about your career here in Stillwater. And if you could, when you came to Stillwater, could you just remind us of your title?
Officially, I was a plant research geneticist working for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Agricultural Research Service, but I was cooperative with Oklahoma State University, specifically in the agronomy department.
And so when you came to Stillwater, I mean, you had a lot of work to do. You were setting up labs, and could you just talk a little bit about the work that went into building your infrastructure?
Okay, this was a new position. There was no equipment, nothing in that regard. The research position initially dealt with trying to breed peanuts for resistance to a nematode, the northern root knot nematode. Initially, I was housed within the Department of Agronomy. They furnished the office space, the laboratory space, field space, some of which was at the Perkins Research Farm, some was at the Caddo Research Farm, which was a peanut research station. So I had nothing, and it was my responsibility to order equipment and anything else I needed through the federal procedures. My budget and my salary was funded through them. The nice thing about being cooperative with the university was that they had facilities that I could use, and they had good people that I could interact with. So it's one of those really truly cooperative programs where federal and state people get together on a common project. So I set about, and this took time to develop. I didn't have a vehicle, and there was a lot of waiting for things to happen. But the agronomy department furnished me about everything I needed. They even they built a small laboratory for me to do my microscopic work in. The research involved a laboratory, a greenhouse, growth chamber facilities, which were located on campus, and field experiments. And it was open pretty well to pursue anything in the area of peanut breeding and genetics, but with emphasis on nematode resistance. And that was a hard battle because they had no idea of which genotypes might have resistance to that, to the nematode. And so there was a cooperative program, and the USDA helped fund it through nematologists that were over at that time in the botany department. They set up, with some of our funding, a program to screen or to test various genotypes of peanuts to see if they had resistance. And hopefully, and they found not any good resistance in the cultivated type peanut that we eat, but they found resistance in some of the wild peanuts And that opened up a new program for me, because then I began to get involved in a interspecific breeding program. As a complicated situation. Peanuts are difficult to work with, even the cultivated peanut, because the crop is produced underground. You can't evaluate it as far as its production and its quality and so forth until you dig it up. And it's a dirty crop because soil clings to the pods, and it's not the easiest thing to work with. Plus, it's a complicated crop, more so than the traditional crops like wheat and corn and sorghums and those. Anyway, over time it evolved into work of collecting with a team of other individuals, collecting germplasm from abroad, South America. That's the home of the peanut. I should mention my colleagues here. Dr. Walton Gregory from North Carolina State University was the eminent one in the U.S. that got involved with collecting wild peanuts. He and an associate, Krapavickas from Argentina, and Pietrielli, also from Argentina, made collections of wild peanuts back in the 1950s. Prior to their work, there was only about 9 species of peanuts known, including the wild, and that didn't include just cultivated peanut. The cultivated peanut that we know is just one species. The work that has evolved since then, there are probably 80 or more peanut species. So the work that's been done, much of it under the auspices of international organizations, have added greatly to the genetic base of peanuts. The wild ones are not easily crossed with the cultivated peanut, so that it's a difficult program. Peanuts evolved in South America. Over time, they were distributed into areas because of the river systems, and they became isolated one from another, and they are isolated to the degree that they're incompatible. You can't breed them without using special techniques. The work that I did and others before me did not involve the new technology where you may be able to clip a gene out of the DNA and insert it. Our work was done with the old classical way of taking growing plants, and I did most of my work in growth chambers because we could regulate the night activity, and we could make our crosses during the day when normal people work. But the pollen is shed early in the morning in cultivated peanuts. You have to get in and what we call emasculate the flowers, remove the pollen sources before the pollen is shed. And then you have to take pollen from whatever male plants you want to use and put that pollen on the stigma of the female plant that you're using. And you're not always successful. You plant the seeds of plants that you've made these crosses on, and you tag these individual flowers. The peanut also is unusual in that the seed develops under the ground, but there is a peg, is what we call it, gynophore is another name, that grows from the upper part of the plant. It's like a tube and grows down into the soil, and the peanut pod actually develops under the ground and the seeds within the pod. It's not as easy to manipulate because you got to have a soil or some media there so that the pegs will grow in. Then you harvest those seeds, you plant them out, you observe the plants to see whether they are actually hybrid or not, and you generally can tell because of the differences in the form of the structure. If they're a diverse type, you'll know. Within the cultivated peanuts, sometimes it's difficult to tell. You have to grow those for 6 to 7 or more generations. If you're selecting for a trait, it'll take that many generations before it's genetically stable so that it reproduces very precisely as right kind. Generally, that's 7 or 8 years because you only get one generation per year under normal conditions. You grow it in field plots and harvest it in the fall, plant in the spring, harvest it in the fall, process the seed and plant it. We had a system, though, that was quite useful to us, using a federal research station in Mayagüez, Puerto Rico. Their season is such that we could grow our peanuts that we'd produced in the fall, send them the seeds, they'd plant them, and then in their spring time, we would harvest the seeds, bring them back to the United States and plant them, or they'd ship them back. I got to participate as one of the scientists that would help harvest the peanuts in Puerto Rico. That meant in those cases that it took only half the time to reach that point of genetic stabilization. My job then, not only did I work with trying to hybridize with the wilds, but it also involved cultivated peanuts. And there were, out of my effort and the effort of the state people, a very good cooperator, I need to mention him, is Jim Kirby. He was the Oklahoma State peanut breeder. And we had assistance from Ron Scholler, who was the extension peanut extension agent. See, this was cooperative. I generally made the crosses and maybe selected what I thought were good potentials, and then Jim Kirby and Ron Scholler would test those in their peanut plots. So there was, I think, 4 varieties of peanuts that came out of our cooperative program. The first one was Pronto peanut, and it was a cross between a Spanish peanut and a peanut that I don't know its history, but we got it from Russia, and it was named Chico. Chico is means small and it was small seeded, but early maturing. It was earlier than our standard Spanish peanut, and I crossed it with several Spanish types, and ultimately we released 2 varieties that could be grown and were advantageous in the Southwest, mainly Oklahoma and Texas. The first variety we released we called Pronto, because Pronto, do it quickly. Then there was another one that was a little better, not quite production-wise, but not quite as early, and we call that Spanco. And then I got involved in breeding, trying to introduce earliness in some runner type peanuts. I need to tell you that there are different classes of peanuts. They're classified based on their commercial value. One is Spanish. Spanish has been historically grown in the Southwest, some in Georgia. It has a growing season of about 120 days from planting to harvest. Oklahoma is at the margin of profitable peanut production because our season is shorter than the southern states of North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama. But my hope was to develop a better Spanish peanut, and that's aside from what I was doing with breeding for nematode resistance. But I got involved in breeding for a better runner type peanut. A runner peanut is a larger peanut grown primarily in the southern states, not in Texas and Oklahoma, but it has good quality for peanut as a food. Our limited growing season, though, doesn't lend itself to growing those longer varieties. So I sought to get something that would grow in Oklahoma, and we ultimately produced a variety which we called Oak Run, Oak for Oklahoma, and Run as a runner classification of peanut. Then I sought to produce a large seeded type peanut. Those were, in the olden days, were called jumbos. These are the ones you see mainly now if you buy peanuts in the small bags in the grocery store that are roasted in the shell. They're using much more of those than they used to. I'll explain the other variety in just a minute. But to make a long story short, I was able to make some crosses with some genotypes, Spanish and large seeded Virginia, and ultimately we cooperatively released that peanut, and it's a good peanut. Those are the mainly ones in the Jupiter was the name of that peanut. I would have picked a little different name, but it came out after I had retired, and we toyed with some names. Jupiter is a bright planet, and the pods were a kind of a bright color, a bright yellowish color, so that was a pretty good thing. Jupiter, that's kind of a strange name, but it goes back to the first, or one of the first good varieties of peanuts for Spanish types came out of Texas, and they called it Star. And then there was a Ralph Matlock, who was the breeder at the Oklahoma station before Jim Kirby. He made some selections within the Star variety, and to keep the Star thing in the name, he called it Comet. Comet came out of Star. So the Jupiter has this kind of a thing too, staying within the galaxy, I guess you'd say.
Would you ever work with grad students?
Yes, I had originally, my appointment was, they treated me like a regular, in agronomy, they treated me like a regular individual working for them. They furnished an office space, and I had a status. Started out, I think, as assistant professor, and I was elevated with time to full professor. And so I didn't teach any formal courses, but I participated in seminars, and I could serve I was on the graduate faculty of OSU, and I could serve on committees of graduate students, and I could have graduate students of my own. They would perform their research under me, but I didn't have any courses that I taught.
And what year did you retire?
I retired in 1990, and that wasn't my choice. I had a lot of things going on, and I had a lot of things that I would like to have written up and published. And you get involved in your research, and I didn't publish near as much as I should have. But anyway, there was a effort on the Agriculture Research Service, because they were losing more and more funds each year, or they weren't getting increases in their appropriations to keep everything going that they would like to have done. So in 1990, and maybe the year before, they began to cut back on research efforts. It's kind of unfortunate. And the peanut research unit, of which I actually started that, we had at the time just me, and then we were able to hire a plant physiologist, Dr. Darrell Kettering, and then a plant pathologist, Dr. Hassan Malouk. And so we had 3 people working jointly together on this general project. And ARS decided that ours wasn't the abolishment throughout the United States. They abolished a lot of different research programs, but the one I was in was one of those. The area director, who was at College Station, Texas, this was ARS, came up one day in July, I believe it was, and he had a specific meeting with us, and he said, we're abolishing the peanut research unit, and this will take place in October 1990. And you will have no chance to transfer anywhere else, because we don't save money by just moving people around. And so bang, that was it. Well, they did ultimately keep parts of the peanut research unit, but they eliminated my position. And I've finally gotten over that. But the unfortunate thing is that I had all these files and everything, hoping to finish them up in a good way. Jim Kirby, Dr. Jim Kirby, had taken an assignment over in Morocco for a period of time. I didn't have anybody where I could leave my materials to. Of course, the genetic material we had was safe, but I'm talking about having to abandon my office and labs and all that kind of stuff. I had my books and my research and all that stuff. And unfortunately, the government and others can do things pretty ruthlessly. They would have just threw my files in the dumpster and gone on. Well, I carried the files home hoping that I would write up some of this, but when you're isolated and have no funding, you have other things to do. But I regret the way it was, but that's the way it was.
Well, looking back on your career as a peanut researcher, are there a couple of moments that just really stand out in your memory? Just really exciting moments in your research?
Well, they were all pretty exciting. Anytime, some of it wouldn't excite too many people, but if you were able to make a hybrid between some things that people hadn't done before, that was pretty exciting. And sometimes I can remember one time when I thought I had made a cross and got all excited about it, and then as time went on and I grew it out, it wasn't that cross at all. It happened to be another cross. But I would say always when you publish a paper and see it appear in print, that's great. When you present a seminar or a paper at a national meeting and you get requests for reprints of your publications and so forth, that's exciting. I don't know, it's just probably the most excitement I had, and this was after I retired, was when I got a phone call that I had been I was to be a recipient of the National Peanut Council's Research and Extension Award, and it was a joint deal. Jim Kirby and myself, someone nominated us to have the award. It's like they used to call it the Golden Peanut Award. It's like the Nobel Prize for peanuts. Anyway, and Jim Kirby, we got invited to get that award at the National Peanut meeting, and Jim Kirby was in Morocco. He didn't make it back. He was on foreign assignment.
Well, that's a big deal.
But that's probably the biggest achievement.
That's a big deal.
It was for me. I don't know where we go from here, but I've had a lot of exciting adventures. Many of it were the explorations. I participated in 4 different trips to South America. That's kind of small in regard to what Dr. Gregory did, and a colleague of mine, Charles Simpson from the Texas Agriculture Experiment Station System. Charlie and I went on our first foreign trip with Dr. Gregory and Krapovickas and Pietrielli to collect peanut germplasm in Argentina and Bolivia. The cultivated peanut evolved from in an area in northwest Argentina or Bolivia. And so Krapovickas and Gregory had been over there a few times, but Charlie and I got to participate. And this was all new to us. Just a few points about this. We went into places, you know, where they were strange to us. They were native people. And my heart goes out specifically to the Bolivians. They're a poor country, but yet, and their people are of small stature, but they are strong. They could carry a refrigerator on on their backs if they had to. I saw this was a playback of time. I saw children playing with marbles, doing the games we played when I was a kid. And that was 50, 60 years behind the times. We had, on one of the trips I was on, we had I never learned much Spanish, which was a disadvantage. But on one of the trips, the Jeep driver was a Bolivian. And when I bid him good due that day, he said, I said, "Viva Bolivia." And he said, "You make me so happy." Just that small communication. Long live Bolivia. Another thing that impresses me was on our first trip, Charlie and I got isolated in a little town. Dr. Gregory, we were supposed to meet at a particular place in Argentina, and Krapovickas, for some reason or other, couldn't show up where where the team was all gonna meet. And so Dr. Gregory told Charlie and I that, hey, I've got to catch the airplane and I've got to get back and get with Krapovickas. You all will be okay, or just stay in, he left money with us, stay in this motel here, and things will be all right. We'll link up again. We didn't know whether he'd ever get back or not. You know, you feel kind of bad because things don't work in foreign countries like they do in America. But anyway, he gave us the name. He had talked to Krapovickas on the phone, and he gave us the name that Krapovickas gave him. He said, if you have any problems, contact this person. And I think he just gave the name and a telephone number. And ultimately we did contact the person because Charlie and I decided, we waited a few days, we decided that we would like to go out, and we didn't have a vehicle or anything, we'd like to go out and explore the the area just to see if there were any wild peanuts growing around there. So I got on the phone, talked to this fella, and Krapovikas had told Gregory that this guy couldn't speak English. And I just spoke English because I didn't know enough Spanish, and Charlie knew a little, but not too helpful. And I just explained the situation. I said, hey, you know, we're isolated here, and Krapovikas gave us your name. And we'd like, if you've got a Jeep or whatever, to look around the country. And he said, if you are a friend of Krapovikas, you are my friend too. Just like that. Would that happen here in America? I don't know. We'd be pretty leery about that. But that's the attitude of those people. I was taken back again one day, early of the morning. We were going to be exploring again, and we stopped at a little kind of a cafe and had breakfast, which was a cup of coffee and sometimes a slice of cheese and maybe a piece of bread. And it was daybreak, just getting light. And the women were out sweeping the streets. The streets were dirt. They were tidying up to make the little community look better. I remember my mom sweeping the yard outside of our farmhouse. Same thing, trying to make things look neat. Those events tug at your heart. Good experiences. Good experiences. I don't know if it's appropriate this time, go back at some of the things that I was exposed to. As a graduate student, you get exposed to going to hearing outstanding professors and so on and so forth. And some of them will ring a bell with you, grab you. One was the university had a policy of bringing some of the outstanding scientists in America to their campuses to speak to their students and even to the town. I attended one time a presentation it was open to the Stillwater community. It was George Beadle, not spelled like the Beatles, the musicians. He and a colleague won the Nobel Prize for chemistry, I think it was. They had come up with the one gene, one enzyme theory that essentially says, and he worked with bacteria, that one gene controls the enzyme production that is responsible for a pathway of metabolism within those. One gene, one enzyme. It's a series of one gene at a time working through the DNA. He presented a seminar one night. This was to the community, and he had to explain what his work was about. He stood up in front of a podium, not one slide, not one note. I think he did maybe use chalk and describe it, but he explained that where everyone understood it. He didn't say genes even. He said these packages of information. Got the point across.
Was this at Georgia or here?
This was here. I was working on my master's degree. Then you have other people. I can remember one during that same year, a fella from the St. Louis, Missouri Botanical Garden, Edgar Anderson, a real brilliant guy, but he was stuck on himself. he presented. He presented some talk, and on one he was in front of the room and he just laid down on the table, and he said, he said, I get some of my best inspirations like this. He said, I lecture to some of my graduate students this way. I thought, well, that's kind of from one extreme to the other. The other thing I remember about my master's degree here is that graduation, I've got a master's degree. I was to get a master's degree, and it took place at night in the football stadium. That's before, the old style stadium. The BS degrees, BA and BS degrees were given early, and they were all individual, shook hands and all that kind of stuff, but it took a long time. The graduate students were awarded their degrees at the last point. And the master's degrees, I think we actually went down individually and shook hands and so on and so forth. But the PhD degrees were a noble event. Dean McVicker, the dean of the graduate college, had the PhD candidates before him. They were in their robes, but they had not been hooded, if you know what the hoods are. And there were, as I recall, 8 PhDs. And he personally hooded each of those candidates and ruffled their, one at a time. And I thought, as a master's degree candidate myself, or I was awarded it by them, I thought, man, that is great. If I ever could, achieve that. And so you kind of set your sights to that, because that was a noble thing, And then when I did get my degree in Georgia, it was kind of like, it was one afternoon, and they just said, will the candidates for PhD please rise? And by order of the Board of Education, you are hereby presented your degrees. Oh, that was a letdown, but I lived through it.
Well, you saw lots of changes on campus, not only as a student, but as a faculty member for, 30 plus years.
Yeah. There's so much I could tell about this. But one event was I had, this had been my first year in college, 1949 school year. I had a class in Old Central. That had been, that was the original building. I don't know if they were not using it for a period of time, but because of the big fluctuations of students, particularly with the veterinarian or with the veteran students, World War II veterans, they were completely out of space, and so they used the old Central. And it was I think I took 2 classes. I know one that I took was psychology. I was still in the schools of arts and sciences. Psychology was a class you had to take. And so I can say, well, yeah, I go back to Old Central. Well, not the original deal. I can also say, some people say, well, I'm as old as dirt. I go back to rock. Rock came before dirt. As I recall, I think I mentioned this before. Part of this, the waiting to get into Gallagher Hall, but I didn't tell you that I think at the time, and I could be wrong, that Oklahoma A&M College had 8,000 students. That's the number that ranks. That's pretty small number as compared to today.
You were also on the crop judging team?
Oh yeah, and this this goes back, the interest in this goes back to when I was in FFA, because our teacher was a local farmer who got a degree at Oklahoma A&M College. His name was Buck Brazel, Estel Brazel. And he was a member of the crops judging team when he was in college. And I think Oklahoma A&M had a good record of winning the crops teams at the national event. And I didn't get very much involved in that at the in the FFA. But a friend of mine, Tom Leonard, Bill Tom Leonard, we called him, early on he wanted to major in agronomy, and he did. There were three Port classmates that went to A&M College at the same time. Bill Tom Leonard, Bill Nichols, and Wilma Howe, and then there was Glenn Counts, but he wasn't with the original. We went back, we started in the first grade together and went on. I ultimately graduated at Sentinel rather than Port, but we were together all those years. And then here we were at Oklahoma A&M College. Tom Leonard went out and made the team the year before I did. I would have been competing with him had I been in agriculture for the first year, but I wasn't. But anyway, Tom, I think, was high individual that would have been 1952. He was high individual, and the team won first, I think, at both contests, Kansas City and Chicago. I followed in Tom's footsteps the next year. This would have been in 1953. And unfortunately, we didn't win. We won second place, but we didn't win at both places. I did place high individual and there were 2 or 3, I think, that were tied in one category of plant identification. But it's kind of a disappointment that we didn't win. But things change. And I need to explain just a little bit about what crops judging is. It's broken down into 3 segments. One of them is plant identification, plant and seed identification, and you have to know the correct and spell these words, the correct common name and correct scientific name, as well as be right on identification. Another is the commercial grading part. Commercial grades are those government established grades for like wheat and corn and even cotton. They're classified in a particular way so that when they trade through the commercial market, people know what they're buying at the top level. For example, a grade would be number 1 hard red winter wheat, and they know exactly what they're getting when they buy that. That's trading at the big level. So, and the other aspect is judging between samples for seed planting purposes. And it's not quite as precise as is the commercial grading. But those are the 3 segments and I made the team, and we took the trip. The trip was by train. We took Stillwater didn't have the high-speed trains, and they were slow. Didn't come out of Stillwater. They went to Perry. We had to go to Perry, catch the train early one morning before daybreak. And I'd never been on a train before. I've seen a lot of freight trains, but this was a faster train, and I can remember we were sitting in there, and this was kind of evening time before it got dark, and we were clipping along. Someone was able to, because I guess of mile markers or distances so far, calculate at one stretch we were going almost 80 miles an hour. Well, anyway, we went and did the judging and all that kind of stuff. But there was the event at Kansas City was the American Royal. It started out as a livestock show, but it became a bigger event. And then the big one was the Chicago event, called the International Livestock Exposition. But it included contests for 4-H club in the high school, for FFA, and the collegiate contests. All of those different contests were held during that time. This was a repeat of what I mentioned before. Jess, many years before, was on the 4-H poultry judging team. And here, I was at that same event, but on a collegiate level. And I'd never been to a city like Chicago and all that. We got to visit a museum or two, and we got to meet some of the people that dealt with the Chicago Board of Trade. And a side note on that, there was a fella that we met that talked to just to our group. He happened to be a friend. This is one of those 6 degrees of separation. I think his name was Larry Parks. He was a friend of Haskell Cudd, who at the time ran the Stillwater mill. I don't know the deal, but he talked to us, and he had some little witty jokes to tell and so on and so forth. And at the time, I happened to be president of the agronomy club, and I thought, man, it would be good if we could have him as a speaker at our banquet, spring banquet. And in the course of some communication, sure enough, he came. He said, I hadn't seen Haskell in a while, and I'd like to visit him. And so he came. We didn't have to pay him anything, you know. And so he spoke at our agronomy band. That's kind of an interesting deal.
Well, thinking back on as your time as a student to the time you were a faculty member, would you ever have interactions with the college president?
Well, the president, when I began here, was Dr. Bennett. He originally came from, I think, Durant. Had been in a college down there. As a matter of fact, it's kind of interesting that I passed it on to my granddaughter, I have a book, an arithmetic book, that he was a co-author on. And it's interesting that I grew up in a farm community, and that book was written to apply to the farm, because the problems would be you grew so many bushels of wheat, and it was the price was so many dollars, and figure out how much money you made on that. Well, Dr. Bennett was the president. He got involved in I can't recall. No, I didn't meet him personally. But he got involved in President Truman's .4 program. The reason it's called .4 is there were 4 points outlined about how to help these particular countries with their agriculture programs. And Ethiopia was one of the big projects, and a lot of people, professors and so forth from Oklahoma State University, went on that program. In 1951, during the break from college, I was visiting my brother Jess in Granite, Oklahoma, and we had the radio on, and they mentioned that Dr. Bennett had been killed in an airplane crash in Ethiopia, ran into a mountain. So I knew that event. And I think we mentioned that I met Dr. Wilhelm before he became president. He became president. He succeeded Dr. Bennett. He was a remarkable fellow. Everyone liked him. He was a pretty serious fellow. I may not have this event quite right, but the number. I don't remember the little old town he grew up in, nor the school he went to, but he became a president of a major university in the United States. But there was more than one person. I know that there were at least 2 people that came out of that same school that became presidents of a major university. That means there was something pretty good going on in those schools at that time. So that's the end of my story on university presidents.
Well, I was looking through your your CV, and I noticed something in there that I just have to ask about. I just have to ask. Tell me about this square dance club.
Oh, well, this was interesting. Sally and I, my wife at the time, got involved in square dance. It was kind of one of these deals. Women kind of like to do the social activity, and they can talk their husbands into it, and then the husband of a friend, and somehow or other, Sally and I got involved in square dance, and we got really quite involved in it. And of course, everyone knows about square dance. The square dance has a caller who puts a record on a turntable, and he sings the call in a melodious way to get the people to perform the commands that he gives them. And some people get to say, oh, well, I'd like to become a square dance caller. And so I kind of leaned in that direction. And I did, as a matter of fact, go, and this was with my wife, to a square dance callers group. Callers College, you'd say. And there you learn how to call and how to associate with the square dance activity, and so on and so forth. So we got involved in that, and I began to try to do a little calling myself. And ultimately, I thought there was a good opportunity here at Oklahoma State University to form a college group. And we did, Sally and I were instrumental in getting this group together. It happened on what was called Alpha Week. I don't know if they still do that or not, but there used to be a week just before official enrollment where the university did a bunch of things with students to get them interested in get them familiar. And during the first Alpha weekend, we got a group together to teach them just a little about square dance, and it took off. I called for that club for, I can't remember, 2 or 3 years. We would go around at the beginning of the next semester, and I had a little old portable unit that I could use. We'd go around to the dormitories and the facilities around and put on a little dance, and then invite them to come and learn how to square dance. And the name of the club was the Campus Squares. And everywhere we went, people they were just awed by us, because college kids they're ready to go, they just have a lot of excitement, a lot of ideas of their own. And so that was a real enjoyable thing. I had to give it up as my profession went. I began to take these trips to South America, and I'd be gone for months at a time, and it didn't, so I gave that up, and the club finally folded. But
Would you call for me right now?
well, Alabama, hey, join hands, circle to the left, circle to the left. Hey, circle to the right, left Alabama, honey, get you right, get a right and left grand. Here comes Sue, there goes Kate, hook right on a promenade 8. Stuff like that. I forgot, I haven't called, but in years. But it's a good activity. It's good, wholesome activity. You get exercise. You get in a group. You don't know whether they're a doctor or a lawyer or a farmer or what. You just have fun. I recommend it.
Did you also stay involved with flying? You know, we talked about how you developed your love for flying.
Well,
did you?
I really enjoyed the flying in the Army, and I don't know if I think I mentioned some of my experiences.
Sure.
But when I think I mentioned that I did not take the job flying helicopters, and that's a point in life where you don't know, how it had been the other way. But I was involved with my kids and, profession and all that kind of stuff. I didn't have time to fly. So from the time of my last flight in 1957 until after I retired, I didn't fly. It was actually 1993 when I decided I'd start flying again. And so I thought, well, I enjoyed flying, I'll do it again, and started looking at the price of, things had changed so much. They had airspace. We were just free to roam. We didn't have to contact anybody. I can remember an event when I was in the Army, and we had to get so much night cross-country time, and we could do this in pairs. Our little airplane just had two people, and my friend McNeese, he said on the way, he said, "I bet you can't find the Dallas airport when we get there." And I said, "Well, yeah, I'll bet you a Coke I can." That's a big splurge. And I called in. I was in the pilot seat at the time, so I had the radio on. I called in to the airport there, it's Love Field, and said, "This is Army such and such a number. We're proceeding to your destination. We asked permission to land there." And I don't know, we were 10 miles out or something. That was customary to do that. And the fellow said, "Okay." He acknowledged that, and I got a little closer, and I began to look, and there were just lights all over the place, big city lit up. And that would have been in 1955 or probably about 1955. It's grown much since then. But I looked, boy, there were street lights, and I couldn't find the airport. And I turned my head and said, "Hey, I can't find the airport. Where is it?" He said, "I can't find it myself." And and about that time, the tower operator came on and said, "Army so-and-so, what's your position now?" And I said, "Well, I'm not sure where we are. We haven't spotted the airport." And he said, "Rock your wings." And I did. That's, make a turn left, a turn right. And he was looking at it in the tower with his binoculars, and he spotted it. He said, "Oh, I have you in sight. Turn to a heading of so-and-so, and you'll find the airport." And we did, very quickly. But that's how much it's changed. They didn't have radar at that point in time. A lot of things had changed. They talked about, I picked up the current regulations, and they talked about a thing like, well, you must have a transponder in your airplane. I didn't know what a transponder was. This is a unit in there that will signal. The tower operators can get a signal on a specific airplane. They'll know, besides having their radar on. So anyway, things had changed. Well, I thought I really enjoyed both fixed wing and helicopters, but I thought when I looked at I thought I'd buy one of those old Army aircraft, L-19, that I flew in the Army. Familiar with it, but man, they had gone. I think the government paid like $8,000 for them, and they were selling for $40,000. And I found out that I could buy a helicopter, one of these old Bubble Bell type, an Army helicopter that they use in MASH. If you've watched the MASH episodes, I could buy it for $32,000, and so I bought that. But their helicopters are much, they were a lot of expense to them, so I sold it, and I owned several airplanes. But it was another learning experience. But it's kind of like bicycling. You get the basics down, and you may be a little bit rusty, but you can get back into it pretty fast. But regulations change, and I'm not too excited about the way things go with the development of all these transmission lines. You can't fly very low, very long, and cell phone towers. You got to be careful. You used to could fly right down on the deck and not have to worry about that. But
are you working on a plane now?
I've got a plane a fellow has helped me build, and it's I don't have it at my hangar yet, but hopefully I will have it there in a month or so, and it still has some work to be done on it. I'm not sure whether I will fly it or not, because I'm getting to the age where I think I could, but I don't know health-wise what will happen, and certain airplanes you can't fly if you don't pass your flight physical. So I'm hopeful that I'll fly it.
Well, tell me a little bit about your family. We've talked about your career.
Okay, well, Sally and I think I told you she was a Stillwater girl. Her maiden name was Randolph. Her folks moved from Ada, and Sally did too, and her dad was involved in farming, and he had a degree in engineering, and he did some teaching in engineering, and during after the war, World War II, he was a teacher for some of the vets. They had a program where they could, it's an agriculture program where they could be brought up to date on the latest farming techniques and so on and so forth. Anyway, I met her. It described the event, I think, where I met her. We got involved. We married before I graduated. I was a junior, but we knew that I would be going into the Army, and so we prepared ourselves for that, and we had some great experiences in the Army. You move around a lot, and then I came back. We came back. My son, Michael, was born just before I went into the Army. So we took him. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but I bought a new vehicle. At the time, we took everything we had. We'd left one small wooden box of stuff we had with Sally's folks. But besides that, everything we had, we took either on or in the car. We had Mike's baby crib up on top and an ironing board and 2 Army GI foot lockers back to back, and the rest of it was in the automobile. We didn't have a TV, so we didn't have to worry about that. The Army experiences were a lot of schools, and then including the aviation part. Then we got out, I came back and got my master's degree. Sandra, my daughter, now deceased, died about a year ago. She was born in an Army hospital when I was at Fort Carson, Colorado. Since that time, the grandchildren, of which Jacob is one, had 4 grandchildren, 3 boys and 1 girl, 2 grandchildren each from the 2, the son and a daughter. And now we have 4 great grandchildren, ranging in age from 2 to 7, and they are a delight. And we were going to have a reunion of my mom's family, the Bale family, on July 20 this year. We'll get together of the ones we can in Oklahoma City and go from there. I don't know what else you need to know.
Well, we've covered a lot of different parts of your life. So what are the stories when your family gets together that we haven't heard? Grandpa, you need to tell this story again.
Oh my gosh. Refresh me on that.
Jacob, is there anything we've missed?
Oh.
I'm trying to think what we haven't talked about. Your accident we talk about a lot.
Yeah.
When you were a kid.
Well, did you pick up writing poetry in your spare time?
Well, yeah, this traces back to we had to learn, the teachers down in the grades even would recite a few poems. And then we would have to stand in front, we'd have to memorize one and stand in class. I didn't really think of it, in much of a matter at the time. But I've always enjoyed rhyming poetry. It just has kind of a melody to it, and I think it's much harder. I've never tried to write what they call free verse or non-rhyme, because it's more like prose, and I think it's easier to do. You can be colorful in the way you put words, but if you have to put words that rhyme, it limits your ability, and you have to be kind of novel about that. But the first poem I can ever remember writing was in my senior class, and just sitting in a study hall or something, I just came up with the idea. It's real simple. Cheer up, my lad, don't feel sad. Cheer up and don't feel blue. Remember that the mighty oak was once a nut like you. Well, that's I didn't do any more about that until we took a trip when I was on sabbatical with Dr. Gregory in North Carolina. We took a trip to the beach, went to Nag's Head where the first flight, powered flight took place. And early one morning, I'm kind of an early riser, one morning I crafted a poem. And it's, "Oh, beachcomber, you come along the shore, and during my tidal run, you bend to pick a shell or more, and you gaze into my face, but you little understand the relationship there is with you and the shell within your hand. It's been so long you have forgotten the rhythms of the sea, but really not very long ago you too were a part of me." It's beachcomber, and that's kind of deals with evolution. If you believe that life began in the ocean. And so I don't write poetry unless I have an inspiration. One, if I can remember it, is at McDonald's one morning. I looked out and noticed the sun coming up and all that kind of stuff. And I was having a cup of coffee. The coffee steams above my cup. The sun is slowly coming up. What kind of day will it be? Will it favor or disfavor me? I have many tasks to do. I'll do them quickly. I'll not stew. Life does not afford a punt. So, go to work. Get me off my lazy butt. I've got one, possibly two others that I might say.
Sure.
And I don't do this, for money or anything. I'm going to pass these on to my kids. One, I've modified. Sometimes I'll write a poem and I think it's pretty good, and then I will, over time, I'll modify it several times, and I made a modification, so I don't have all of this committed to memory, so I may have to look at my note here. But this is about my mom. It's called "I Miss Mom." I read my Bible daily. It keeps me in good stead. I say my prayers at night whenever I go to bed. I've not always read the Bible, but prayers I've mostly done. My mother told me often, "You need to do that, son." Early on, Mom taught me a simple prayer to say. It's the "lay me down to sleep" one. I learned it in a day. In memory of my mom, I still recite that prayer. I say some special concerns about folks of whom I care. Mom died many years ago. That day sure made me blue. Her good advice days ended then about the things that I should do. Oh, how I'd love to see her. I miss her very much. I know she'd like to see me too. And that's not just a hunch. I'm at a point in life now when I could go her way. It's a morbid thought we have when we are old and gray. But I look forward to a time when Mom's happy voice will say, "Donald Jack, come on in. You've just made my day." I wrote a poem about why I can cry, but I'm not going to give it here. I'd like to end on a happier note. You know, when you're young, you get out of the tub or shower and you look at your naked self in front of the mirror and you think, wow, how great thou art. Well, I have a poem, Reflections of Life. And I'm reminded nowadays when I look in the mirror after my shower, here's what I see. I am a rack of bones, a bag of skin with blood and organs deep within. When I was young, I did not know with old age I would so ugly grow. Ugly was not the worst to come. Fading health and brain made me dumb. Childhood for me was a happy time, especially when Mom gave me a dime. Many toys I did not buy. I made my own. I watched aeroplanes in the sky. Midlife came, it was not bad. But debts, and taxes made me sad. Now in twilight, I reflect on life. There were happy notes and some discords of strife. Would I change things? I know how. Present a smile to every scowl. My time is up. There's nothing new. My last request, may God bless you and you and you.
Well, before we close out, I have one more question, but is there anything else you'd like to add before we end today?
There's a lot I could add, but I think I can't remember.
Well, looking back on your life, how would you like to be remembered?
Average. People ask me how I'm doing, I say, about average. It takes all kinds of us, you know. If it wasn't for us average folks, the really good ones wouldn't shine. I've had a good time in life. I've made mistakes, but that's what life's all about. I've had so many events take place that I think few people are privileged with that, but maybe all are. Trying to get along with people is a problem. And the Bible will tell us that love thy neighbor as thyself. incorporates most, if not all, of the 10 Commandments. It's kind of hard to do when if you got a neighbor who has barking dogs that wake you up at night. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's been a pleasure learning more about you, and thank you for sharing your story with us.
I'm glad to do that. Thank you.